Welcome back to another edition of Talking Tilton. This time I am sitting down with Betty Schofield. How you doing, Betty?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
You know, despite the wonderful weather that we've been having in New England lately, I am doing all right. I can't complain.
No, I can't either. I'm just thankful for a nice warm house to stay in.
Absolutely. Now, you're in Maine right now.
Yes, near the coast in Kennebunk.
Oh, that would be cool.
We are getting snow and rain mix.
Absolutely crazy. It is springtime, is it not?
Well, they say it is on the calendar, and that's no April Fool.
You got that right. I want to thank you right off the bat for taking some time to do Talking Tilton. I understand that you and your family actually came into the Northfield area quite a while ago.
Right. We moved to the Bennett Farm in 1943. I had just turned 4 years old, and my older brother was 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, we were in Connecticut, and my father and my uncle together had a big chicken farm. And in the 1938 hurricane, it blew flat, and they lost everything.
Wow.
So at that point, my dad went to work on a farm with the hope that maybe in the future he would be able to have his own. So fast forward a little bit, what happened in 1943 was that my grandmother, his mother, gave her life fortune, or her life savings, I should say, for the down payment on the farm, and had the understanding, of course, that she would have a home with them for the rest of her life.
Okay.
So with that arrangement, they moved to Northfield to the Bennett Farm, and it was 130 acres, 70 acres on one side of the road and 60 on the other. They purchased that 130 acres for $1,800.
Wow.
And it was owned by a very elderly man, Albert Shaw, and he kept 2 acres of open field to build a little house for himself. And for $1 and a handshake, my dad acquired all of the farm equipment for farming with horses.
That's crazy.
It actually was the way things were done at that time.
And it seemed like such a simpler time to be able to do it that way.
Uh-huh. And I was everything that he needed to start the farming that he hoped to do. It had a stable for 20 cattle and stalls for 2 horses, lots of storage for the fresh hay. It was a 10-room house, and the carriage shed that connected the house and the barn was 64 feet long and open underneath, that you could put in all of the farm equipment under cover.
Okay.
No indoor plumbing and no electricity.
All right, so it's like camping.
I can remember tagging along with Stanley Guile from Guile Wiring in Franklin when he actually put the original electricity into the house. And I was a junior in college before we had full plumbing indoors.
So you're familiar with using outhouses?
Oh, yes. Luckily, it was attached to the back of the shed, so we didn't have to go outside. But through the years, the first step was, of course, as a child, my first job every morning was to pump the pails of water from the kitchen pump for my mother for the day.
Okay.
Then eventually we got running water into the house, and then a little bit later from that time we got running water into a room which they had always set aside to become a bathroom. So we had running water in the bathroom sink. Then the next step after that was to get the toilet installed so that we actually had a flush toilet. And then there had to be a period of waiting to have the money to install the bathtub and shower.
So how excited were you the first time that you actually flipped the switch and had electric lights and you were able to actually flush a toilet?
I know, they were big family events.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, they were. I think I was the last one in my class to have the indoor plumbing fully, and also I was the last one in my class to have a television set.
How long did you guys own the farm for?
Well, we had it, and then I inherited from when my dad and mom were gone. And until David's health began to reach the point that he couldn't take care of the buildings, and we did not want to see them go, into disrepair.
Right.
So we had to make a decision to have the auction of the farm equipment and then sell the property.
And if I'm not mistaken, I remember on a school trip there, didn't you guys have like a Model T or something in one of the barns?
Yes, David had he had a Model T, that 37 Ford, and he had that for quite a few years. Eventually he sold that to George Flanders.
And I remember that was absolutely in mint condition, if I'm not mistaken.
It was his baby, yeah.
He always took care of that.
We had a lot of fun with that with the children, and like one of the highlights was taking it in the Andover 4th of July parade, and Grandma Schofield would be in the back rumble seat with the boys, and we'd be in the front with our daughter. And one year they made a mistake and halted us and gave us the blue ribbon, and it wasn't really meant for us.
Really?
So we had great fun that day. Yeah, we enjoyed the car for many years, and again, it reached the point where Dave felt he couldn't take care of it.
Right.
And sold it to George Flanders. Yeah.
Now, you guys, being from around the area for quite some time, you've probably seen a lot. Take me through some of the things, because you were there when Highland Ski Area was in full operation.
Yes, my dad was a selectman for 21 years, and oftentimes people would come to the farm and they'd sit out on the porch or around the kitchen table, and he'd answer questions or explain things to people or just discuss things, not make decisions because they needed to be made in the office, but he could discuss things with people. And I completely, clearly remember the day that Bob Elliott knocked on the door, wanted to talk to my dad, and what he wanted to say was, "Bob, I am ready to start completing my dream." And my father said, "What do you have in mind, Bob?" And he said, "Look out across your field, look up at Bean Hill." He said, "I have a dream of that becoming a ski area."
Oh, baby.
And that started the thoughts of actually the formation of the Highlands.
Now, that is a cool story.
Right. I remember it so clearly because my dad, of course, got very excited, and Elliot was extremely excited. And he stood there in our front lawn and looked up Bean Hill and said, "This is where I would do this, and this is where I would do that, and over in such and such a place would be the biggest trail." And from there, it really started to happen.
That had to be cool to be able to take it from a concept, to think about that, to envision it, and actually put it into the mountain.
Right. And then he had his plan, and he worked on it, and it became reality for the town.
Now, did you do any skiing at all?
Well, I didn't, but my boys were 5 and 6 years old the first year it opened.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a wonderful program for the children. And Bryant Lawrence Hardware Store, Kidder's, I think it is, over in Franklin, had a wonderful program of very inexpensive skis and boots and poles, a package, for the children.
Right.
And the recreation supported it with the buses and all. And that's how the children got started going up to the Highlands and having their lessons and skiing, very inexpensively and so forth.
Sure. Now, I know...
My boys were so young,
mm-hmm.
they were intimidated about going in the lodge. And, of course, we were right at the bottom of the hill. So I would take them up at 8 o'clock. They would ski all morning. I would go up at 12 and get them, bring them down the hill, give them lunch, warm them up, take
mm-hmm.
them back at 1 o'clock, and they would ski until 4, and I would pick them up again.
Oh, my goodness. That's what you call a busy day.
Yes, yeah.
I still remember being up by Bennett Farm and coming down that hill and looking
mm-hmm.
straight out at Highlands, and you could tell all the lights on the ski area. They were making snow. It was a beautiful sight.
Yeah.
I was kind of sad when they had closed.
Yeah, too bad that, that happened, but that's history.
What are some of the other things that you remember going on in Northfield and Tilton during the time that you were there?
Well, I remember when 93 was going to come through town,
mm-hmm.
and I remember people very upset that that road was going to come through, and it was going to bring all sorts of bad things into town from out in the world, and that was a big concern. And the other concern was trying to understand eminent domain, that
mm-hmm.
the state and the government could take land freely to bring 93 through town.
Right.
And I particularly remember one gentleman sitting with my dad out on the porch crying because that meant they were going to take the center part of his property and leave him with a little piece of land on either side of his property and the road going through the middle of it. And what could he do?
Right. I mean, unfortunately, when something like that happens, you don't have much of a choice.
No. And I remember the disbelief of things like that when 93 came through. That was not a happy time for Northfield.
Who would have thought that someplace like Exit 20 would have gone from pikes and sand and gravel to what it is today?
Right, exactly. Yeah. When my dad was first selectman, he worked in the mill, the leather mill, and it was a very simple, crude little office on the Northfield Town Hall, and old wood stove,
mm-hmm.
and about 3 desks, and it was one room in the front and then 3 little rooms out in the back behind the big room, and those rooms never had any heat. And for the main office, my dad would get out of the mill at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and he'd go to the town office and he'd start the wood stove, and he would stay with it until it was safe to bank it with wood to heat it up for the Tuesday night meeting.
Okay.
Then he would go home and clean up from working at the mill and have his supper and go back down for the selectmen's meeting every Tuesday night. No secretary. They wrote their own checks. They went to the post office and bought their own stamps and just did everything, the three of them, on their own, without any help. I would love hearing all the stories, that he would tell.
Absolutely. Probably back in the day when you could actually trust the people working in office.
Sure.
Oh, my goodness. When you walk down the main street of Tilton, back when you were growing up, what do you remember? Take me through what it looked like.
Well, I remember the beautiful trees And I remember it was always busy. There were always, somebody to meet, to greet, to chat with. When my folks first went to the farm, I remember that there were 3 different couples that came to greet them, farmer to farmer. And one family was John and Dorothy Aldrich from Giles Dairy,
Mm-hmm.
and another one was Harold and Evelyn Corliss from over on Turnpike Road, and their son became a very good friend of my brother's, and they would run back and forth or ski back and forth on the power line between Bean Hill Road and Turnpike Road.
Okay, yep.
And they were in the same class. And then seemed like another couple up on, you interviewed him, Bernie Chapman.
Oh, yeah.
The senior Chapmans, I remember them coming and bringing a dish to greet farmer to farmer. Like I said, I think they had chickens also and were interested in what had happened with my dad. They were the first people in town that I remember.
Tell me about life in Tilton when you got there, as you were growing up, what it was like, people you met, businesses that you've seen.
Yes, Tilton was very lovely and with the beautiful big trees. It was as typical and as enjoyable and nice as any all-American small town was after the war. I can place myself in history because the war ended, World War II ended, and a few days later I started first grade. So I can look back to that part of history when things come up in conversation. But if we started at Tilton Inn and walked down Main Street, there was the post office on the corner of School Street. Other corner of School Street was Pop's Diner. The old original diner sat right on the edge of the sidewalk.
Yep.
And then Witcher's Barbershop and Pettengill's Jewelry Store, the A&P, Sanborn News, Presby Drug Store, Moscadini's little Italian market. I remember the Elder Shepherds and the furniture store. And then it came the Tilton Theater. You went along, you had the Congo Church, further down Stebbins Drug Store, and of course the banks. And crossed over and came up the other side, you had Rafferty's Market, H'Spurs, and of course Bryant Lawrence, William Carroll, 5 and 10. Myron's. You had everything in town that you could possibly need for the type of living that we were doing, with ration books and just being able to purchase your need. I remember my dad taking me into Bryant Lawrence every December, and we would go shopping for Mom for Christmas, and we did that many years. Mom got a Christmas present from Bryant Lawrence, whether it was something she needed or could use or wanted. Mm-hmm. That was our shopping trip for Mom, along with many others doing the same thing.
And you could literally find anything at Bryant and Lawrence.
Yes, anything for your kitchen, was there. And, of course, you'd break things or see things you want, and he always managed to find a nice present in Bryant Lawrence at Christmas. I was partial, of course, to the Hill Block because the day I turned 16, I started working for Alan Stewart in Herrick's Drug behind the ice cream counter. Mm-hmm. And next to Herrick's was Jordan Electric and Bob's Market and Dr. Grievier on the end by the river. Right next to the end of the Hill Block, between the building and Main Street where you turn to go toward Laconia, there was an empty space, sort of like a little plaza, and people would gather there sometimes and talk, and young people especially. And I very clearly remember when Ike Eisenhower came through town the first time he ran for office.
No
And
kidding.
he stopped right there and came off out of his vehicle and was on that little tiny plaza where maybe 10 or 12 people could stand. And I remember going out and shaking his hand and
Wow.
meeting him personally as a teenager. That was quite a thrill.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And another thing, we knew the trains came, of course, to the train station, but we also had buses because the bus line came from Concord before 93 was built, and it followed Route 3 from Concord up through Franklin, came over to Tilton, went up to Laconia, then Meredith, Ashland, Plymouth, and on up into the White Mountains. And stopped several times a day, and it would, coming south, stop in front of the inn, and going north, stop at that little plaza area by the end of the hill block. I saw some of the men from the different town families when they came home from the war, step off the bus and, yay, I'm home safe from being at the war. And another thing was nice on Main Street was the churches on Sunday. Of course, they were very busy.
Sure.
But the church bells, I remember the church bells. One church would play, and they were had it all timed, and maybe the Congo Church would peal their bells, and then the Methodists, and then the Episcopal before and after the services. And in those days, the students up at Tilton School were required to attend church, and they had an affiliation with the Methodist Church, and that was where I went to Sunday school. And I can remember rows and rows of the young men from Tilton School in church on Sunday.
Okay.
Always in shirt and tie and dressed up.
So what are some of the, and I'm sure you probably witnessed a lot of changes in the town. What is some of the most memorable that you've witnessed?
The most memorable, I think, was as we began to travel, and you mentioned, to somebody that you met somewhere, Tilton. People knew Tilton all around New England and beyond. And the one thing that was always mentioned was the Tilton Arch. Oh, that's the town that has the arch. And that was very well recognized in the Northeast.
Oh, and I'm sure, people came from all over to see it.
Yes, and the last day of school, when we were at the elementary school at Union, all of us students were marched one by one in a parade from the school up to the arch to have a picnic. And we brought our own lunch, and the custodians were at the end, and they came with boxes of the vanilla Dixie cups with the little wooden spoons.
Yep.
And that was our treat for the last day of school. And boy, did we look forward to that outing.
Who doesn't like ice cream?
Well, and it was plain vanilla, a little cup of plain vanilla with a wooden spoon, but it was a big treat because, after wartime, we weren't getting treats like that.
Now, I also want to touch, because I know you and Doc both taught for an extensive amount of time. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I know you're going to talk about how Doc actually got his name, and I never asked him, and I think a lot of people probably don't know the story.
Well, we both graduated college in 1961, and he landed the job at Tilton-Northfield, and he taught, of course, the agriculture, but he also taught a couple of classes of biology.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a young man in class who was very upset because his pet rooster was not doing well, and he had a problem with his leg, and he was talking about it in biology class. In those days, when you're young and carefree and you're able to maybe do things on the whim, Dave said to the student, "Bring your rooster into class and we'll see what's wrong with it." So the boy brought his rooster into biology class, and it was a problem with one of the legs, and they operated on the rooster and fixed the ailment that the rooster was having.
Right in school.
And right in the classroom in biology.
Oh, my goodness.
And from that day on, the kids dubbed him Doc for doing that surgery on that rooster.
Wow. I always wanted to know.
Yeah.
But
it never left him. Yeah.
No, I still remember when I took his class, and that, of course, that was before the big agriculture building and everything was built in the front of the Winnisquam. But it was absolutely wonderful. He always treated each one of the kids with respect, and I loved that.
We both really enjoyed our professions. He had 30 years of teaching, and I had 25.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly can say I enjoyed every single minute of it. It was a good fit for me at Memorial Middle School in Laconia.
Mm-hmm.
I had opportunities to teach at Tilton-Northfield, but I did not feel that it was fair to our children to have both mom and dad in the same building where they were going to high school.
Kind of an interesting thought, yeah.
I didn't want that for them, and I was happy where I was, so I stayed in the Laconia School District.
Now, what did you teach there? Because I remember going to Memorial Middle School for a little while between 4th and 6th grade.
I taught home economics.
Okay, maybe that's where I took your class, because for some reason I was thinking it was Winnisquam, and I remember taking, did you teach cake decorating too?
Oh, yes, that was part of it.
Okay, yep, then it was definitely you. I just got the schools wrong, because I'm thinking, what an awesome class. Who taught cake decorating in school? Man, no wonder I became a baker later in life.
Yep, we had a very active program there in the junior high, middle school years.
So if you had to pick one thing about living in Tilton that you really enjoyed, and it can be anything, a memory, a person, a place, what would you pick?
Well, I was Daddy's little girl, and he was a busy man with being selectman and so forth, and wherever he went, I went with him and got to see and meet a lot of people that way. And I think my very favorite place that as a childhood to remember going was Charlie Marden's blacksmith shop.
Okay.
And it was on Pleasant Street across from the former post office building.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go in there with my dad, and he would let me pump the bellows and get the fire roaring and red hot. And he would show me how he would take a strip of iron and form it into a horseshoe and repair the horseshoes when they wore them down. And I was fascinated when we went there. And I would go home, and my mother would say, "I know where you've been. You've been at Charlie Marden's because you've got black soot all over your clothes."
Oh, man. Oh, that had to be such a good time, though.
It was. Yeah.
I've always said that I think I was born about 20 to 30 years too late. And
you know, my classmates, we've had a lot of reunions, and we always say One of the best things for us was that we were all equal.
Mm-hmm.
We were all struggling. We were all wearing hand-me-down, patched clothing. None of us had any more than the next child. We were all equal.
Right.
Because of the tough times that the country was going through.
Isn't it funny how far we've come from that now?
Mm-hmm.
It's such a different time. But you know what? The memories that we hold on to are absolutely incredible.
Well, they made us certainly what we are. It was interesting with bridging the generation gap and being able to explain firsthand what living was like for us and where we were coming from as things got better and, young people had more and did things differently.
Right.
But we had very good reasons. I mean, we lived with cardboard in our shoes and patches on our boots, and women would take maybe the back of Dad's shirt when it wore out, and the back would still be good, and they'd cut it down and make a shirt for a child. I remember when the grain deliveries were made on Bean Hill Road, and the ladies would scramble to try and get the same print of grain bags so that they could share them and change them. And there were 5 ladies, and on grain delivery day, the first delivery was to Dot Kenyon. And then when the truck left Kenyon's, she would quickly call up the hill to Minnie West and tell her something like, I've got 4 blue checks and 3 red stripes. See if you can get the same grain bag, and then we can swap.
Wow.
And then when the truck left Minnie West, she would quickly on the phone call Emily Jocelyn and tell her what her grain bags were. And then when the truck left Emily's, she would call Marion Haggett and tell her what to look for in the grain bag.
Oh, my goodness.
And the next one, the last one, was my mother, Viola Bennett. And they would then get together and swap around the printed grain bags. And all of my skirts and little pinafores and things were all made from grain bags.
Wow.
In elementary school at Union School. Yeah.
That is so cool. And a lot of people, I think, forget just how lucky we are this day and age.
Yes, I remember some of the local men when they were able to come home from the war, some of the harbor boys in Lockwood. And I also remember the day the train brought Raymond Pike's body on the open flatbed draped in the American flag, brought his body home from the war, and the whole town turned out to greet the train and pay their respects.
Well, Betty, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to do Talking Tilton. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, it certainly is humbling to me that you would want to interview me, and I'm had a lifetime of memories in Tilton-Northfield.